came with the canoe to Fort Yukon, the river kind of swirled around right in front of the bank that was by the town, and you had to be really careful so that you would land. And when Royce got pulled up there with the canoe, here came this man down the bank, and he wanted to know if he could help pack our stuff up to where we were going to camp, which was very nice of him. He had a ATV, yeah, that he loaded up our stuff and took us up to camp. So we had set up our tents, and then pretty soon here come this man in a pickup dragging a picnic table and set it up for us by our camp. And his name was Frost, I can't remember. And they called him Frosty, and he was like the Chamber of Commerce. And we asked him if he'd like to stay and visit, and he said no, but if you have the coffee pot on, I'll come back tonight and visit with you. And he was very, very hospitable. And when we got home, we sent him back a T-shirt and some clothes from Montana.
Yeah, but I got to tell some more about Frosty. Frosty's father was a white man that had been in Royal Mounted Police. And in 1915, he'd been assigned to Old Crow. And he'd done a very good job there for 7 or 8 years, and then he took up with a 16-year-old Indian gal, and they drummed him out of the Royal Mounted Police. And but he stayed there, and he trapped the rest of his life. He had 10 children. All 10 of the children lived, and all of them lived in that same area still. So if anybody ever goes up the Porcupine River or Old Crow, why you'll find about a third of the 300 people there are named Frost. If you ever read any books about that area, and there are several of them, there's always a reference to the Frost family, because they really were quite a family. And one of the things that I found interesting with Frosty was the first question he asked that night when he came into camp. He said, "Did you see any game upriver?" And we said, "No, we just saw hardly anything. We were disappointed. We thought we'd see moose and caribou and things, and the only thing we saw was a muskox." And here we were, where we'd first started was up in the tundra, and there should have been muskox fairly close there, but by the time we got down the river 150 miles or so, it was, we'd been going through scab spruce timber for 150 miles and tundra and things, and it just wasn't the right country for them. We come to this, the first sign of habitation that we saw. We came around the bend of the river out of a canyon, and here was a long straightaway, and on the left side, we could see a building with a tin roof on it. It wasn't too far from the river. And then on the other side of the river, here was a blue tarp up in the trees there. And right near the blue tarp, we had spotted a figure on the bank, and I told Ruth, "I'll bet it's a grizzly bear," because it just, was shaped about right. Ruth got the glasses out, and she says, "Well, that's the first grizzly bear I ever saw with horns." But anyway, we got down close and we took some pictures of it. It was all by itself. It just wasn't a normal situation at all to have it there. But anyway, when I told Frosty this, he says, "Are you sure?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "Exactly where was it?" So I described, the building and the blue tarp, and he says, "I'm 64 years old, and he says, I've trapped every winter since I was 14, and that's always been my trapping headquarters." He said, "If you would have gone up over the bank, down the other side, you would have found my trapping cabin." He says, "I've lived here for 64 years, and he'd never seen anything like that. Nobody in the village ever had." So he really was skeptical as to what we had seen. So we sent him pictures when we got back. And then when we went to leave, he said, "Now 30 miles down the river," he says, "I've got another cabin, he said, it's really a nice place to camp. He said, why don't you stop there? And he said, I'll be down later tonight. So we stopped there, and when we got up by his cabin, why, here was one tree by the cabin, and everything else about, roughly 15 feet around it was just completely demolished. All torn up, and all the brush torn out, and the ground looked like it had been plowed. And when we got there, I said, Frosty, what happened there? He says, oh, he said, I set a lair there, and he said, I caught a grizzly bear a week ago. And he says he kind of tore up things before I got here and shot him. But it was a very adventuresome trip.